I had a fan meetup recently, and much to my surprise, I had lots of ex-Catholics show up. Catholicism has been on my radar for a while now, but I haven't really paid much attention to it. I did a video about it a while back, but I took it down because I felt like my views on Catholicism have changed since I released it. But after talking to some ex-Catholic fans and reading up on the religion more, I decided it's time to address Catholicism. Is it a cult? Let's get into it. Before we get into it, I just want to mention a couple of things. YouTube has been destroying me with views and demonetization lately, and it's been doing it for lots of people. So if you want to support me, there are a few solid ways. First is Patreon. YouTube makes their money through advertisements too. They get a percentage of the money YouTubers make through ads. So they're really hurting themselves by demonetizing people left and right. In fact, there was a news article that came out recently basically saying that YouTube's net revenue from 2018 was down a lot, which sucks for them because YouTube was already not generating income for Google before Adpocalypse even took place. YouTube is a drain on Google right now. Whatever, that's fine with me. I honestly don't even care. If they want to demonetize and deprioritize people's videos, let them. It's their loss. I and others are lucky enough to have the support of people like you through Patreon, PayPal, and other forms of crowdfunding. YouTube doesn't get a dime from that, and it guarantees we can continue doing what we do without worrying about what YouTube is doing. So that's a really good way to support me and other YouTubers. Another good way is through using services or goods we provide. I sell t-shirts with funny designs about cults I've covered in the past. I have shirts for ex-Jehovah's Witnesses, ex-Mormons, and others. Take a look to see if I have anything from your previous religion. And finally, you can support me by hosting your websites with me. It's a Linux VPS with cPanel, so if you're unfamiliar with cPanel or SSH, it might not be for you, but it's something to consider. Okay, with that being said, let's take a look at Catholicism as a cult. If you're new to my channel, you might be unfamiliar with the BITE model. The BITE model was written by Stephen Hassan, and it addresses common strategies cults use to control people. It's an acronym. It stands for behavior control, information control, thought control, and emotional control. There are points under each category. Now, I use a scoring system that seems a little confusing at first. I score each point from 1 to 7, but I use the Fibonacci sequence instead because the gaps look bigger. It's easier to decide between a 13 and a 21 than a 6 and a 7. I'll put a little graphic on the bottom of the screen to make it easier to follow. And one more thing I want to mention. I try to be really soft on cults when I go through the list. I'd rather be accused of being too soft than too harsh. If it's really a cult, it'll shine through regardless of whether or not I'm soft on them. That being said, let's compare Catholicism to the BITE model and see how it matches up. The first section is behavior control. Number 1, promote dependence and obedience. I don't think Catholicism is terrible about this one. I know Jehovah's Witnesses do this through discouraging college education and discouraging interaction and friendships with the outside world. So you become heavily dependent on the social network you form on the inside. And if you leave the religion, the entire thing comes crashing down. That's very much intentional. But as I said, I don't think Catholicism is anywhere near as bad as Jehovah's Witnesses on this front, so I'll go with a 2. Number 2. Modify behavior with rewards and punishments. They actually do this pretty heavily, but the repercussions of breaking the rules aren't as extreme as some other religions. I'll be comparing to Jehovah's Witnesses a lot since that's where I came from originally. With them, for example, the repercussions for breaking rules is socially ostracizing, possible loss of responsibility within the church, which is viewed and referred to as privileges, and in the worst cases, complete disconnection from childhood friends and family, permanently. But I'm not judging it based off of the level of extremeness of the punishment. I'm basing it off of whether or not they're actually modifying behavior. And Catholicism definitely does modify behavior. If you break the rules, you have to do penance or repentance, where you take a special necklace called a rosary, and you touch a bead and repeat a mantra for each bead on the necklace. It can take anywhere from 5 minutes to hours to say the assigned number of mantras. I would definitely call that behavior modification through a system of rewards and punishments. I'll actually go with a max score of 21 for this one. Though it isn't extreme punishment most of the time, it's still Pavlovian-style operant conditioning in the truest sense. Number 3. Dictate where and with whom you live. This one is almost not a problem at all. In fact, as far as I can tell, it isn't part of the official institutional doctrine. But the social side of it exists and is still relevant. So I'm putting down a score of 1 instead of 0 because they'd still discourage you from, say, living with an apostate, for example. Or even discourage you from living with somebody before marriage. It's low, but it's there. Number 4. Restrict or control sexuality. This one is actually pretty intense. The most extreme example I can think of for controlling sexuality would be Heaven's Gate, where they would sit at the breakfast table in the morning and they go down the line telling sexual thoughts and feelings they had to try to shame themselves and others out of having them. Catholicism isn't that intense. Where Heaven's Gate is a 21 on this point, I'd say Catholicism is a 13. Number 5. Control clothing and hairstyle. Women don't, say, have to wear hijabs like they do in Islam, but they're still pretty strict about modesty, and it can get really serious on a church-by-church basis, so I'm rating this one pretty high. I'd put them down as an 8. Number 6. Regulate what and how much you eat and drink. Catholicism basically doesn't do this one at all, as far as I can tell, though they discourage drunkenness, so I'm going with 1. Number 7. Deprive you of 7 to 9 hours of sleep. This one isn't really a problem either, though church takes priority over sleeping in certain cases, like if you have to work all night, so I'm putting this one at a low 1 also. Number 8. Exploit you financially. The Mormon Church is a prime example of financial exploitation. You have to pay 10% of your income to maintain full membership. Jonestown, aka the People's Temple, was even worse. The leader of People's Temple, Jim Jones, was a communist, so everything the members brought in went straight to Jones. There was no private ownership in this group. Catholicism does pass around a collection plate, but it isn't anything like Jonestown or Mormonism, so I'll put them down as a 3. They still collect money, it's just not the worst I've seen. Number 9. Restrict leisure time and activities. They really aren't terrible about this one either, but it's still there. For example, some extreme Catholics have a problem with watching R-rated or PG-13 movies, or reading smutty romance novels, or consuming graphic pictures or content of any kind, so I'm putting this down as a 3. Number 10. Require you to seek permission for major decisions. This one is actually pretty high. For example, you're supposed to go through the church for marriages. Unlike with some other cults, you don't have to get permission to move or to go to college or anything like that, but it's still there and it's pretty strong, so I'm going with 8. When you get married, you and your partner have to talk to the priest and take parenting classes. You have to sign contracts saying you'll raise your children as Catholics and everything. A lot of this stuff is left over from tradition, like the contract, and I'm sure it isn't legally binding in any way, but it's still there. So in my mind, it counts. Okay, that's it for behavior control. The average point value for this one is 6, rounded to the nearest point. We had some 21s in there, which doesn't bode well for Catholicism. Now let's take a look at information control. Number 1. Deliberately withhold and distort information. I spent some time thinking about this one because the average member of Catholicism doesn't deal with this. But if you notice, a lot of the time, cults will send people through training to break down their personalities and build them back up in their cult's image, like the military does. With Mormons, they do it around their 18th birthday. They'll send them on missions for 18 to 24 months, and while they're there, it's non-stop personality breakdown the entire time. If they make it through that, then they're probably in it for life. And Catholicism has their own version of this in the form of private Catholic schools and universities. I have a Catholic high school in my area, and I knew some students who transferred from it when I was in high school. They said sex and drugs were worse than any other school in the area, which is interesting. Anyways, I'm gonna put this down really high for the sake of Catholic schools. I'll say 21. Number 2. Forbid you from speaking with ex-members and critics. I don't think this one is enforced from the top down, but from my understanding, there's a lot of social pressure to avoid what the church would call apostates, or serious critics of the church. I'll go with 13 because I've seen worse, but it's not great. Number 3. Discourage access to non-cult sources of information. Again, I really don't think this one's terrible. I've seen worse cases, but including Catholic schools in my consideration, I'd say they followed a solid 8. I've seen worse, but it shouldn't be discounted. Number 4. Divide information into insider versus outsider doctrine. I don't think they're terrible about this one, but they do think that anybody who isn't a baptized Catholic and isn't caught up in their confessions is going to hell. That includes all the good people of other denominations who just didn't know the truth or something. So I'm going with 8 on this one too. Number 5. Generate and use propaganda extensively. I gave Jehovah's Witnesses a score of 21 on this one, the absolute max, because the company that owns and runs the religion is literally a printing press. They put out extensive propaganda on a semi-monthly basis, not to mention all the propaganda videos and cartoons targeted toward children. But Catholics aren't anywhere near that level. I'd say they followed a solid 3. Number 6. Use information gained in confession sessions against you. I feel like this one's kind of complicated. They do use information gained in confession sessions against you, but it's intended to condition you in a Pavlovian way, operant conditioning, which we covered earlier. So I'm going with 13 on this one. It might deserve a 21, I don't know. But like I said, I'm going soft on them because if they're really a cult, it'll shine through anyways. Number 7. Gaslight to make you doubt your own memory. I don't think they do this much unless you include the things they teach about evolution or creation or abstinence or whatever else in Catholic schools, which does count, so I'll give them a reasonably low score of 3. Number 8. Require you to report thoughts, feelings, and activities to superiors. They are really serious about this one. It's pretty much built into the religion from the ground up. If you die before you confess your sins, then you go to hell. And they really hammer that fear of hell into you, to a very unhealthy level. So I'm going with 13. It really doesn't get more extreme than this, aside from giving a full hour-by-hour breakdown, including the non-sinful stuff. But every sinful thought, feeling, or activity you commit needs to be reported to the priest immediately. Number 9. Encourage you to spy and report on others' misconduct. This one can get pretty extreme, but I don't think it's church doctrine so much as part of the Catholic culture. But I don't discount the culture, it still counts. So I'm going with a 5 because I've definitely seen worse, but it is there. The final rounded average score for information control was 10. That's definitely getting up there. If it's 8 or higher, then I have serious concerns, not to mention the fact that they got another 21 on this one. The next category is thought control. Number 1. Instill black versus white, us versus them, good versus evil thinking. They're pretty bad about this one. Really bad, in fact. But I've seen worse cases. I feel like I could go with a 21, but I'm giving them a 13. Again, if they're a cult, then it'll shine through despite me being soft on them. Number 2. Overreaching or exaggerated importance placed on events or ideas. A good example of this one is where Jehovah's Witnesses will completely separate themselves from a major societal event, like celebrating Christmas, because of some insignificant and long-forgotten pagan roots. They're placing way more importance on some insignificant event or idea than is warranted, and the members are suffering as a result. I'd put Jehovah's Witnesses down as a 21 for this one, but I don't think Catholics are awful about this. I'd put them down as a 3. Number 3. Change your identity, possibly even your name. I talked to an ex-Catholic about this one on my podcast. If you want to give that episode a listen, you can click the card in the corner and it'll take you straight to the video. It's also on iTunes, SoundCloud, Spotify, and a ton of other places, so check it out. But she pointed out that they don't really do this on a normal basis. However, they do this in monasteries. Monks and nuns receive entirely new names. I'd say that counts. As you climb the ladder, you're assigned an entirely new identity. For that reason, I'd give them a 13 on this one. Number 4. Use loaded language and cliches to stop complex thought. I haven't seen many clear, solid examples of this, but it does exist. I think they have a bigger problem with mantras and thought-stopping techniques than loaded language and cliches, so I'm going with 5. Number 5. Induce hypnotic or trance states to indoctrinate. I'd give this one a pretty high number because they do have you repeat prayers at the church service, over and over, just like you do when you pray the rosary basically. So I'm going to say 13. I'd peg Pentecostals as the worst about this one and give them a 21. I don't think Catholics are that bad, but they're up there. Number 6. Teach thought-stopping techniques to prevent critical thoughts. I definitely call praying the rosary a thought-stopping technique. This one gets a high number, 13. Number 7. Allow only positive thoughts. They aren't terrible about this one. Positive thoughts are encouraged but not required. I'll say 2. Number 8. Use excessive meditation, singing, prayer, and chanting to block thoughts. This one's really high too, just like with the thought-stopping techniques. I'll give them a 13 for this one too, if for no other reason than because of how they're expected to pray the rosary. Number 9. Reject rational analysis, critical thinking, and doubt. Again, I wasn't going to give this one a high number because standard adult members aren't really controlled to a high degree in this way, but Catholic schools and universities and monasteries do this to a high degree. I'll say 8. So the average score of this one was 9. The next category is emotional control. Number 1. Instill irrational fears or phobias of questioning or leaving the group. This one is really serious. They really drill the fear of hell into you. I have to give this one a 21. I'm trying to be soft, but I can't ignore that. Number 2. Label some emotions as evil, worldly, sinful, or wrong. They definitely view some emotions as sinful or wrong, like lust for example. I'm giving them a score of 8 for this one. Number 3. Teach emotion-stopping techniques to prevent anger or homesickness. They do this, but I don't think it's much more than most other Christian denominations. But since it does still happen, I'll give them a score of 5. Mormons are probably the worst about this when they send their kids on mission trips. I'd peg Mormonism as a 21. Number 4. Promote feelings of guilt, shame, and unworthiness. Catholicism absolutely must get a 21 for this. It's like their defining feature. Catholic guilt is something people spend their entire lives trying to get over. Doesn't get much worse than this. Number 5. Shower you with praise and attention, or love bombing. I don't think this is intense, but it does still happen. When somebody's trying to join, for example. I'll say 2. Number 6. Threaten your friends and family. Threats don't have to come in physical form. Jehovah's Witnesses, for example, threaten to pull your social network out from under you if you disobey. Lose your childhood friends and family forever. I'd mark Jehovah's Witnesses down with a really high number, but I don't think Catholics are terrible about this one. It's still there. I'll give them a 2. Number 7. Shun you if you disobey or disbelieve. Again, it isn't really enforced from the top down. I don't think it's part of the institution anymore. It used to be, but it's still a big part of the culture. I'll give them an 8. Number 8. Teach that there's no happiness or peace outside the group. Jehovah's Witnesses and some other groups actually teach that people are only on the outside of the religion because they want to sin, and they're actually miserable. They're living miserable lives, barely surviving. I don't think it's like that with Catholicism exactly, but it is there. I think Catholics acknowledge that people can live happy lives outside the religion. You're just not going to make it to heaven if you don't follow their set of rules. So I'll give them a score of 5, where Jehovah's Witnesses, Heaven's Gate, or Jonestown would be a 21. So the final average score for emotion control is 9. That means the final average score for the entire bite model is 8.25. And as I said before, 8 or higher is very concerning. I think Mormonism got an average score of 8 on my first run through, but since I've reassessed it with Mr. Atheist, it bumped up to a 13. Anyways, I would call this one a cult. It doesn't have to be a tiny group to be cult-like. I'd be very cautious about joining Catholicism. As I said before, I did a Catholic video a long time ago, and I took it down because I wasn't sure I completely agreed with everything in it anymore. After talking to all the ex-members and doing my own research on it, I feel confident in this assessment. As I said, I tried to go soft on them with a lot of stuff, but there's still a lot I didn't even address, like their complete adoration and borderline worship of a single figurehead, the Pope. I could talk about this group for hours and hours. It's very extreme as a monolith, and when you drill down and go church to church, it gets more and more extreme. Anyways, that's all I've got for you. If you like what I do and you want to see me continue to do it, you can support me through Patreon. That's a pretty good way. But if you want to get something back, you can support me by checking out my Teespring. I sell a bunch of funny shirts and mugs and stuff on there. And finally, you can support me by hosting a website through my servers. If you want to contact me for hosting, you can find my business email address in the description. Also, I decided to start another channel where I do retro game reviews and stuff. My first review was reviewing Mario Kart 64. I call it Why Mario Kart 64 Sucks. The next video I'm putting out is on 2 of the rarest games for one of the most obscure Nintendo consoles in existence, the Virtual Boy. It's going to be interesting, so give them a watch. All links are in the description as always. Okay, thanks for watching, guys.